What's up, Duval? It's your favorite Jaguar, Bucky Brooks, and this is Bleav in Jaguars, a podcast dedicated to all things Jacksonville Jaguars. We look at the ins and outs of the team. We break down the games. We talk about personnels, philosophy, strategy. If it's something that deals with the Jacksonville Jaguars, we're going to touch on it here. And I'm really excited about what has been going on. The community is growing. We've been having great dialogue and interaction. Some of the stuff that you guys have been saying on YouTube, I certainly appreciate, but I also appreciate the fact that the community is growing. And as we get closer and closer to the regular season kickoff, I'm hoping more and more people kind of join us here and we kind of have a nice hang and a chat and go back and forth as I kind of give you an insider's perspective on what's going on with our favorite team. But before we talk about this week and what is actually happening this week, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are in town to take on the Jacksonville Jaguars for the second preseason game of the season, but they're doing joint practices. So we're going to talk about joint practices. We're going to talk about expectations. We're going to talk about some of the conversations that have been had this week with the offensive coordinators talking, Press Taylor, then Ryan Nielsen, and also a little bit of what Doug Pederson wants to get out of the week before we head into that preseason game. But before we do that, let's pay off the sponsor. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. From the preseason NFL games to college kicking off, Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads while games are being played. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our winner take all 300,000 NFL Survivor Pool for this upcoming season. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today. Use promo code Bleav, Bleave. Hold on. Use promo code Bleav, Bleav, and get in on the action. Bet Online, the game starts here. And guys, we talked about the game starting here. Last week, we saw the Jacksonville Jaguars take on the Kansas City Chiefs. It was a solid overall performance. All three phases did really, really well. We saw some standout performances from some of the young guys. Parker Washington, Tank Bigsby, Chad Muma stood out. We saw some older veterans. Travis Gibson stood out as a guy that is being counted on to kind of be that X factor in the pass rush. A lot of really good things came out off the tape. But the one thing that we should learn about the National Football League is a what have you done for me lately league. So all those great things that took place last week, we're on to the next week. We've turned the page. We're looking forward. And so all of our eyes should be on this week and this opponent, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And before we get to the opponent in terms of the preseason game, we have to discuss like what is going on in Jacksonville now. The Buccaneers come up early. They are going to practice with the Jaguars a couple of days in what we call joint practices. And so what joint practices are, both teams get together. They will intermingle and go through some things in a very competitive situation, but they basically are practicing together. Instead of using the scout team, though, the other team provides that resistance on offense or defense or in the kicking game. So, for instance, if we're doing an inside run drill, rather than the Jaguars having the ball and running against their scout team defense, giving them a look, they will go thud tempo against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. The benefits of this and going through these situations and different things in practice is you get the physicality, the tempo, the added effort that you would get in a preseason game while mitigating some of the risk. And the reason why it's mitigated is because one, it's not live tackling to the ground. Two, the quarterback is never live. And so you're not going to worry about them coming and taking a clean shot on the quarterback because that's not in play. Three, you're able to dictate the situations that you want to see so you can evaluate your players in under certain circumstances. So red zone, backed up, short yardage, goal line, all of those things that come into play, 4 minute, 2 minute, all of that. You get a chance to kind of create those situations and see how your guys and your team responds. As a coach, that's perfect because you're now able to have what really amounts to a dress rehearsal in practice in a competitive environment that is much different than the one that you try and manufacture and create it when it's just your team. All those things are great. The thing about joint practices, and everyone has a different philosophy on how they go about it. Some teams will come in and they will say, hey, man, let's not worry about what the other team is doing. It's really our drill. We're going to go through these plays, and whatever they do, we're just going to line up and play. Other teams may use this week as an opportunity to put together a game plan to give guys a chance to go through the routine of, hey, here's how we game plan. Here's how we put it together. This is what we're thinking about. These are the things that we emphasize throughout the course of the week to get ready to perform. For your young players in particular, this is really the first opportunity for them to kind of get their beaks wet in terms of, hey, this is how you got to prepare for the week. This is the way that we break the week down by days. Here's how we would approach these situations and circumstances as we get ready to play. And now on Saturday, we are about to play. Let's go play. And let's do it within the framework of maybe a bit of a little game plan, some structure in terms of how we're going to attack the other team, maybe a little scouting, but not a ton, but just a little bit of work to get them going. When it comes to joint practices, look, the Jaguars take a different view. They are more, hey, it's all about us. It has little to do about them. Very minimal game planning. You may touch on some things that are maybe unique to what the Buccaneers do, but in general, you just want your guys to play fast. So you're going to evaluate them as they have to react to things in real time. Things they haven't talked about, adjustments, quirky formations, things that they may be ill prepared to face, but they have to adapt and adjust on the fly. Those things are all positive. When it comes to the all about us stuff, it is less about making sure that we defeat the opposition and more about, can you play to the standard that has been established? We've heard Doug Pederson talk about it all offseason, raising the standards, make sure everyone understands who we are, what we're about, what kind of players fit in, and how we expect them to play. Well, the joint practices gives you an opportunity to see all of those things. You get a chance to see the effort. You get a chance to see the execution. We also get a chance to look at the physicality and toughness and all of those other things. And because it's a situation where the first teamers are going to get the bulk of the work, it's great. It's great because you get a chance to evaluate your starting team in a controlled environment, and then you get to put them in hats and T-shirts on Saturday night and let the young guys play in what amounts to the last scrimmage that they'll have an opportunity to really impress. I mean, there's another preseason game, but this is the one that everyone is kind of counting on to kind of make those tough decisions and those things. So that's the benefit of the Bucs coming in. At the time of taping this podcast, I saw some clips, and it looked like the Jaguars were certainly holding their own. Brian Thomas Jr., he got over the top of the defense, made some plays, but it's not quite enough to kind of make determinations. The joint practices, though, are really good evaluation tools for the scouts as they're looking at guys and just trying to figure out what you want to get from the team. So that's always really, really good. Let's now talk about some of the things that have taken place over the course of the week with Doug Pederson addressing the press. And what I love about Doug and what I love about all the coordinators, they're really, really forthcoming about the information and their thoughts when it comes to the team. And I think Doug was really, really open and honest about really liking the way the team played and performed against the Kansas City Chiefs. He certainly has put an emphasis on getting this team to play the right way. Anyone who has been around the team, they've heard the sentiment echoed by the team leaders multiple times about just getting back to playing the way that the team should play, meeting their standards and expectations, making sure everyone is really digging into the preparation process, practicing well in the production meeting leading up to the preseason opener. Trevor talked to everyone in the room about, hey, man, we need a little pressure on ourselves to perform at a high level. At the end of the day, the fun from playing pro ball is in the winning. And we have to win, and we need to learn how to win, and we need to make sure that everything we're doing is about putting ourselves in a position to win, not just having winning seasons, but to win at a high level where we eventually talk about being in the final game and doing those things. And I'm loosely saying that, but Trevor did talk about winning. The fun is in the winning. And he is someone who has won at every level, high school, college. And we want to say, hey, he is eventually going to win at a major level in the pros. Well, Doug Pederson has talked about those standards and talked about how the team looked and how they ran around and played with the effort and enthusiasm that he wanted to see. He talked about the physicality and toughness that they displayed. And even though it's a preseason game and it doesn't count, it does matter because what we're doing, We're trying to create those championship habits that are going to carry the team through the regular season. That was great. And heading into the second week of the preseason, this is the last opportunity that the Jaguars will get a chance to do some heavy work, meaning put on the pads multiple days, knock each other around a little bit, work on the physical element of playing the game at a championship level. This is the last week that you can do it, because when you get to next week and you begin to go into, I would say, game week mode, well, now the number of days that you can have in padded practices, it shrinks all the way down to maybe one per week. They have these things written into the CBA where maybe you only get 14 padded practices over the course of a 17-week season or 18-week season, 17 games. So you really got to be smart with how you utilize your padded practice days. And so because of that, training camp is everything. Trying to get your team ready to play with the physicality and toughness and all that, you have to do that in training camp. And so this has been really critical for the team. This has been a big week because it's the last time that you can put the pads on and kind of play big boy football in practice. So Doug wanted to see these guys kind of execute, kind of get ready, to kind of like have the calluses that you need to be able to play physical opponents to open the season. This team has really talked about and really upped the ante when it came to the bigger, faster, more physical premise that Trent Baalke has talked about in the offseason. But the only way that you can really capitalize on that is your practices have to reflect how you want to play. So if you claim that you're going to be a physical team, your practices have to be very physical. They have to be edgy and those things, even feisty. So it'd be interesting to hear the feedback from how the Jaguars held up against what is always a very physical Tampa Bay Buccaneers squad. Before the joint practices, Press Taylor had an opportunity to talk about the last week and some of the things that he learned coming out of that preseason debut against the Kansas City Chiefs. And he talked about a lot of great things in the press, and you can listen to that. You can hear that on Jaguars.com. But what I took away from it is the things that he was directly talking about in terms of finding out about himself as a play caller. He talked about being on the sideline. It is different from being up in the box, because up in the box, you can kind of spread out. It's not, I would say, the pressure or the emotional pull that you feel in the box compared to being on the sideline. But I was surprised to hear Press Taylor saying that, man, he really enjoyed being on the sideline. And being on the sideline does give you the opportunity to talk directly to the quarterback. You get to talk to the skill guys if you have to make corrections. You also get a chance to talk to the coaches of those respective positions to make sure everyone is on the same page. From a corrective standpoint, it's a lot easier to correct mistakes and fix things when the coordinator is down on the field, because it's not secondhand information being passed down through multiple channels to get to the players. You can handle it directly. You go right to the players. You tell them, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to change. And this is how I want to see it played out. Press Taylor being on the sideline did that. Now, he brought up something that was really interesting. He talked about the communication organization being critical, because you have to remember, it's a collaborative effort when it comes to the Jaguars calling offensive plays. Press Taylor or Doug Pederson, one of those guys, will submit the final play and those things, but only they know how they organize their thoughts to get things done and called. And Press Taylor, talked about, being on the sideline, we had to tweak the organization just in terms of like, hey, who's yelling down in distance? Who's telling me like line to gain? Or, hey, they just hit us with this, so let's look at the numbers, and the numbers suggest X, Y, and Z. All of that takes place on the sideline, so it can make it kind of crazy and chaotic on the side. And when Doug Pederson has to tend to another part of the team, whether it's special teams or defense, having Press Taylor on the sideline allows him to take a bigger role when it comes to talking to team, fixing things. He gets to kind of earn his keep in that regard and earn more respect from the players, because he can show them that he's a problem solver. So that was a really interesting note that came out of the press when Press Taylor was talking. But I would say the most, intriguing thing that he said is something that I have discussed with my partner on another podcast, Move the Sticks. Daniel Jeremiah and I have talked about wide receiver cores being basketball teams. Well, Press Taylor brought this up in the press conference, and he said, like, I've been with teams where we kind of viewed the wide receiver core as a basketball team. We needed to have guys that had varied skill sets and could occupy and handle different roles, because depending on each team that you get, like you may need certain pieces of the puzzle to fit in different spots, and you have to have like some versatility within the ranks while also having some clear designations of the pecking order. So when I think about Press Taylor saying like, hey, our team is built like a basketball team, it naturally made me look at the unit and say, okay, well, let's just use like, for a while there, like Golden State was kind of everything when it came to team building or whatever, as they won titles. Where when you think about the Golden State Warriors, they had a handful of guys that were the scorers, right? So let's think about in their heyday, the scorers would be Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, and then Steph Curry. How could I forget? And then they also had some guys, who like would come off the bench and they were designated, I would say, 3-point scorers. And so those guys were kind of like the big players. They were the ones that would stretch the defense and make it happen. And even though the aforementioned three guys that I talked about, Kevin Durant and Steph Curry in particular, they were the go-to guys, there was someone that could stretch the floor like a Klay Thompson, that would make life easier for those guys to go and get buckets. But then there was always someone who could come off the bench and make things happen. And so whether it was Andre Iguodala or Sean Livingston, they always had a sixth man that could come and do some things or whatever. And then there was an X factor that you just didn't know, but when they put him in the game, like they would make things happen. So in using that, in terms of breaking them up in categories, scorers, 3-point shooters, six man, and X factor, I look at the Jags and I would say that, and I'm saying this because I have tremendous amount of respect for Marvin Jones and Zay Jones, but I will say that, and even Calvin Ridley, I would say that the way this team is constructed on the perimeter is the best version of the wide receiver core that we have seen. And the reason why is because as we think about the basketball team analogy, this team has guys that are designated for specific roles where they can absolutely flourish within those roles. So let's talk about the scores. All right. So we talked about the Kevin Durant's and the Steph Curry's, the guys who are the go-to guys, the guys who the offense is built around in the passing game. Well, to me, it's easy because we talked about it all offseason. We talked about Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram being co-number ones, which brings me to the Warriors. You remember Kevin Durant and Steph Curry, they kind of shared the marquee as a whose team is it, who's the man, who makes it happen, or whatever. But when I look at this team offensively, Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram are the ones where it starts. We've heard Doug Pederson talk about the offense, the passing game works inside out. And part of that is because Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram do their best work inside the numbers. So as the go-to guys, the designated scorers, a lot of the success that the Jaguars have will be tied to the production that Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram have over the middle of the field. Well, much like the Warriors needed to make sure that teams couldn't double team or collapse down or lean or tilt the zone toward their main guys, they had to have enough 3-point shooting to stretch the floor. One of the big things that the Jaguars hadn't had before, they didn't have anybody who could shoot the three or stretch the floor. Well, this offseason, they go and get two guys that can kind of act in that Klay Thompson role, the 3-point shot, back everybody up, create more space on the floor because they're big play weapons. And those guys will be Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. When we think about what the top two guys do, the code number ones, they work in the intermediate areas of the field. Well, the only way to prevent the defense from really condensing and clamping down on those intermediate and short throws is you got to be able to throw the ball over the top of the defense. So much like the 3-point shot stretches the court and creates more space for the dribble drive guys, Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis' ability to put the ball in the paint over the top of the defense will create space for Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram. We've talked about what those guys had accomplished prior to getting to Jacksonville. Brian Thomas Jr., 17 touchdowns. His final season at LSU, averaged like 17 yards a catch. He's a big ball specialist. Ironically, he caught a big pass in the preseason opener for 40 yards, and it changes how defenses have to defend the Jags. Gabe Davis, a guy who has averaged over 16 yards per catch throughout his career, a guy who has always had at least 6 touchdowns in each of the 4 seasons that he's been in the league, a guy who in his preseason debut had a 20-yard catch right away on a dig route, an explosive play by any measurement. Well, now that you have two guys that can stretch the floor, that can stretch the field, it should allow Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram to have more success and more room to really work their defender and find ways to touch the ball, which is what is key for this offense to play at a high level. Now, every team has their starters, but you got to have someone off the bench that can kind of change the game. And it is appearing that Parker Washington is settling into that role of being the sixth man. The guy that provides energy, that provides electricity, does something to quickly shift the momentum of the game. Parker Washington did that 74-yard kick return right away. Bang, Jaguars scoring position. A couple plays later, bang, Jaguars score. We see him have a punt return that registers as an explosive play. Guess it takes it off, maybe 13, 14-yard game, but a field flipper. Much like the sixth man can come off the bench and just get hot and streaky, Parker Washington has that ability. But it's not only Parker Washington that you look at on the side like, okay, he has potential. He can do some things. There's an X factor in the core, and that's Devin Duvernay, all-pro returner, a guy who, look, we got him positioned in, he's going to be the returner, punt kicks, he can do it all. But he showed that he can also be potentially a weapon on the outside to join Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis in terms of stretching the field. 35-yard touchdown from C.J. Beathard. The speed is real. He's an impact player. And as much as I love Jamal Agnew, Devin Duvernay is an upgrade. And so quickly, over the course of the offseason, through either acquisition or development, the Jaguars have now created a team that is a basketball type unit at the wide receiver core with guys like perfectly suited to play the roles that they're expected to play. Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram are built to be number one receivers in this offense. They'll be the scorers, much like Steph Curry and Kevin Durant. You think about the three-point shooters, the guys that stretch it. We talked about BTJ and Gabe Davis being able to add that element to stretch the floor to create more room for Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram. And then the six men, or the guys off the bench that are the energy squad, Parker Washington and Devin Duvernay. So real quickly, when you think about the guys that are in the core, man, there's six guys, and I'm going to count Evan Ingram in that, six guys that can do multiple things, but their skills collectively complement one another. The Jaguars are right. Press Taylor talked about assembling a basketball team. This team has an opportunity to be one that lights up scoreboards because the basketball team, the pieces fit perfectly together when it comes to that puzzle that we're talking about trying to create on offense. Final thing, let's talk about the defense, and let's talk about Ryan Nielsen and how he liked the way the team played on Saturday. Here's what I'll say about Ryan Nielsen, and I told you I've been impressed with him since I met him and since I watched a couple of his practices in the spring. This team is all about effort. They're all about really creating opportunities for the team to play fast, to be super physical on the perimeter, and to really be turnover obsessed. Simplicity in terms of what they do and how they're asking the guys to do it. The complexity comes in the post-snap movement to get to your designated job. So the concepts aren't complex, but the way they get there, they can do it a few different ways to really make life miserable on the quarterback. In that first game, we saw the effort. We saw an attack mentality in terms of this team attacking the quarterback, attacking the ball, flying around, making things happen because they didn't have to think. And if they're able to kind of play like that, they can have a lot of success, particularly if the offense puts up the kind of points that we expect, where teams are forced to abandon a balanced game plan and they got to play one-dimensional football against a unit that features Trayvon Walker, Josh Hines Allen on the edges, and Eric Armstead on the inside, with Travis Gibson coming off the bench to occasionally give you another piece of the puzzle when it comes to the pass rush. But the pass rush, which had 5 sacks against the Kansas City Chiefs, is also dependent on the coverage in the back end. And I've talked a long time just about like how Chris Richard and the work that he was able to do with the Seahawks and the Legion of Boom, how he's going to be so impactful in terms of getting this secondary, this young secondary, to play really well. Well, we saw it play out Saturday night. The coverage was sticky. We saw Christian Braswell get beat early, but the effort and energy was there. Then he attacks the ball, takes it away, scoop and score, what should have been a remarkable touchdown that was celebrated. They called it back, but it was a great play, and it really, I would say, embodied how the Jags want to play going forward. More importantly, on a play in which he was beaten and wasn't in position, he worked to get back to finish the play the way that you should. And it really highlighted what was a really solid night of coverage on the perimeter. And as the Jags get more comfortable playing this man-to-man scheme and some of the other things that Ryan Nielsen is doing and wants to do, you're going to see more plays and more plays on the ball. And if the coverage is sticky, the pass rush is going to be ferocious because these dudes up front can hunt. We're just beginning to scratch the surface on what this defense and what this team could be, but it certainly looks good after one game in the books and looking ahead to what could be on the horizon in week 2. So as we continue to follow this team, we continue to talk about what this team is going to do, make sure you kind of keep it locked here on Bleav in Jaguars. I want you guys to go, and I want you to make sure you rate, review, discuss all of the things that we're doing on the podcast. Make sure your friends tell a friend to come back and join us and talk about the Jags and start submitting questions and interactive thoughts, whether we do it here on the Bleav in Jaguars podcast in the comments on YouTube, or if you hit me directly on my Twitter, or X as they call it now, at Bucky Brooks. And we can begin to have these conversations that are interactive on the pod and give you a voice. Final thing, make sure you tune into my colleagues at Bleav Network. Check out the stuff they're doing on YouTube. Check out some of the stuff that they're showing on Fubo. Go and make sure you follow the at Bleav Network at BLEAV. See where they're going. They'll keep you up to date and let you know when these shows are going to be broadcast. And as we think about the Bleav in Jags podcast and some of the stuff that we want to get done as we get into the season, just in terms of building and growing the community, it's really important. You guys come back each and every time we drop one. Make sure you let us know how you like it, things that we can do, things that you're curious about. Leave those commentaries because we're trying to kind of fit the podcast around the needs of what we have when it comes to Duval and everyone that is associated with the Jags. So until next time, I'm Bucky Brooks. This is Bleav in Jags. I'm out.